Welcome, I'm Jon Caldara, president of the Independence Institute and your devil's advocate. A little later in the program, we're going to be looking at the, some 39 or 40 tax increases just for schools. But first, you know him, you love him, and he's rubbed so many people the wrong way because you do your job. Scott Gessler, Secretary of State, glad to have you.
Thanks for having me on, Jon.
Yeah, well, the Post just really has been ripping into you lately, and I haven't quite figured this one out because your job is to run clean elections and to follow the election law, and your job is to make sure people who aren't eligible to be registered to vote aren't there to vote. Isn't that basically it?
Pretty much. I mean, the way I look at it is you want to make it easy to vote, tough to cheat. And some people don't like it when you pay attention to the tough to cheat part and try and make sure that our elections are fair and honest, and you've got integrity behind them.
Let me see if I understand what was going on. You put together a list of about 4,000 people who were registered, but you really weren't certain if they were eligible to be registered. Is that the best way to put it?
Exactly. So what we did is we compared our driver's license rolls to our voter registration rolls, and we found, we confirmed that there were about 4,000 people who proved that they were non-citizens when they got their driver's license, but were also registered to vote.
Now that doesn't by itself mean they are not eligible to vote, does it?
Exactly. We don't know. We assume that a lot of people had become naturalized citizens since they got their driver's license, but we also recognized when you look at other states' experiences and all of the people who had come to our office and voluntarily withdrawn as non-citizens, but we also recognized that there was a sizable portion of those folks who weren't properly registered to vote. But we didn't know how big or how small that was. So what we did is we...
And by the way, if you're not eligible to vote, if you're not a citizen, but you're registered to vote, and if you vote especially, both of those are crimes, aren't they?
It's, so in order to register to vote, you have to be 18 years old by the time of the election, you have to be a resident, and you have to be a U.S. citizen. So we don't verify citizenship at all. It's an honor system, basically. And so people can show up, and sometimes they misunderstand, sometimes there's problems, but they're nonetheless registered.
How in the world can it be an honor system? I'm sorry, I'm trying to figure this one out. So people can say they're eligible, and your job is just to trust them?
Absolutely. So what happens is they fill out a voter registration form, and frankly, you know, sometimes they don't entirely understand it. The interesting thing we found is that a lot of times people will say that they're not a citizen on the voter registration form. So it says, are you a citizen? And there'll be a box that says yes and one that says no. And we have people that say, no, I'm not a citizen, and yet they register to vote. What that means is...
But you can't register them, can you? If they vote, if they no, you have to look at that, I would hope, at the Secretary of State's office and go, well, then I can't register you.
Yeah, what it means is two things. One, people don't understand the law. So there's a real lack of education out there on what the law is. And secondly, it's the clerks that actually go through those forms and register them.
All the county clerks.
The county clerks. And it secondly shows that there's some slop as far as people not carefully looking at those registration forms and making sure that if someone says no, they're not registered to vote, you know, that person shouldn't be registered. And instead, we've seen instances where people register them anyway. So there's a couple problems we found in the system.
And you, tell me if I've got the timeline right. So you found these names of people you weren't certain of, and you sent them a letter and said, by the way, we're not certain if you're eligible to vote. If you are, please tell us how you are and show us that you're eligible. Or if you're not eligible, please remove your name. Did I get that part right?
That's exactly. It was a voluntary compliance is what we asked.
Why were people so hacked off about this?
Yeah.
I didn't get that part.
I don't know. I think part of the reason people were hacked off is because they want to politicize this. I think there's people on sort of another ideological end of the spectrum, and they want to politicize this and use it as a way to sort of create anger and rile up people to help them out by creating a boogeyman that doesn't exist. So I think that's one thing that's going on. I think the second thing that's going on is no one's ever done this before. We've done it for the first time, to actually go out and try and make sure our voter rolls are accurate in this way. And whenever you do something new, or you know, when you change the status quo, when you challenge the status quo, I mean, there's people who get really mad. The status quo is the status quo for a reason, and there's people who are entrenched, and they're the ones who are happy with the way things work. And so when you try and make changes along those lines, you get people who just get mad about it.
You've been trying to get some extra data from the feds. Homeland Security has a database that you could use to compare. They haven't been very cooperative. In fact, they didn't cooperate until after you sent the letters, right?
Right. Well, we've been trying for about a year, well over a year, to actually get access to, it's called the SAVE program. But what it is, it verifies non-citizen information. So if someone is here legally or used to be here legally, when they apply, they get a number. And what this system does is if you put in that number and the name and the date of birth, you can verify whether or not someone is a legal resident here, whether someone is, has since become illegally here, for example, their residency expired, or whether they've become a naturalized citizen. And there's about 1,000, 1,500 agencies across the country that use this system for welfare benefits. We use it in our office for notaries public. So it's used in a lot of ways. And what we wanted to do was use it for voting purposes. And it took us, over a year before we could actually get access to this. And first they said, no, you can't do it at all. And so we sent letters, then we got other states on board, and Florida was involved in a lawsuit, and they finally said yes. But they didn't say yes until after, actually give us the access, until after we had sent out those letters.
And if they had given that to you earlier, you probably would have sent out fewer letters because that would have clarified many of these voters.
Absolutely.
All right, but just for the sake of time, out of that, you still found people who were ineligible to vote, and it looks as though they have voted. I understand you have to go through some due process,
right,
but it's not like this came out that all these people are eligible to vote. That's not the case.
No, what we did is we were able to check on the federal database about 1,400 people. And of that, 1 in 10 came back, 10%, came back as non-citizens still, improperly registered to vote. And of that 1 in 10, that's about 140 out of the 1,400, about 35 or so had actually voted in prior elections. Now, we're pretty sure that they shouldn't have voted and shouldn't be registered to vote, but we're not absolutely sure. And
but
so
it looks as though it was a crime.
It very much looks that way. So what we're doing is we're saying, look, you still have another opportunity to come in and tell us if the information is wrong. Sometimes it's a crime, and probably sometimes it may not be a crime, and here's why. Remember I told you that a lot of people register to vote even though they're non-citizens and they think they can register to vote? So I think a lot of what's going on out here is people are erroneously registering to vote thinking that they can. We've had letters, we have copies of letters in our office of people who have written us and said, hey, please remove me from the voting rolls, I'm a non-citizen, and I actually voted, and I thought I could vote. In fact, I thought it was my duty to vote as a permanent resident, but since then I've learned I can't, and so please remove me from the voting rolls.
What do you say to those people who say, come on, so you found 140 guys who shouldn't be voting, or potentially shouldn't be voting, shouldn't be registered. You know, we got a state of 5 million people here, and you're getting your panties in a wad over 140 guys. That's a rounding error.
Well, a couple things. First of all, so far we know that's how big it is. We really don't know how big or small this problem is. At the end of the day, the tools we have are very crude, so it could be much bigger. Those 140, that's based on 1,400 we were able to check. So there's probably more out there.
So in other words, out of what you checked, 10% were bad.
Exactly. Secondly, I don't think any fraud is acceptable. I don't think any mistake is acceptable. We have to do a good job because, thirdly, we have a history of close elections in the state of Colorado. So Congressman Jared Polis, he's a congressman right now, he got his start by winning a statewide Board of Education election, statewide across the entire state of Colorado, by 90 votes. Bob Beaupre used to be a congressman. He won in a
by 216 votes.
Actually, it was 121.
121.
121 votes. We've had county commissioner races, state legislative races, decided by a handful of votes.
I remember primaries that have come down to 4 votes. Yeah.
So this stuff matters, and we want to have.
What do you say to those people who say, you know, but this is intimidating? That when you ask people to prove that they're eligible to vote or take this up, really what you're doing is you're making it difficult for people to vote. It's intimidating to them to do so. They like to say you're disenfranchising people by doing this.
It's two things I'll say. There's a great, in 2004, the John Kerry presidential campaign, their Colorado election manual on Election Day said that you should claim, they should claim, voter intimidation even if there isn't any evidence of it yet. So this is a common tactic, I think, on the left to do that without any evidence. And in 2004, they actually said in the presidential campaign that they will do that without any evidence. So it's a talking point. Secondly, if you really look at what's going on, we're asking people, we have voluntarily to come forward. We've done lots of checks on databases. We need to have accurate voter rolls. And my view is, and I think if you look at the data, it supports it, when people think that the elections are honest, when people think their votes count, when people think that their vote is not diluted by illegal voting, they're more likely to vote. They're inspired. They have confidence that our elections are good, not that our elections are rotten like other countries.
Kind on time here, so let me ask you a couple things. One, this blew my mind, and I just found this out recently, that if the people are registered to vote, you can challenge to say that's not a citizen can go up and say that's not a legal registrant and you guys have to look at it. And you can put those challenges in up to 60 days before the election. However, right now, as we're airing this, there's voter registration drives going on like crazy for this fall's election. You have to take registration up to 29 days before the election. Now, I don't know if my math is all that good here, but it seems as though there's another month that people can make dummy up registration numbers and cards and people, give it to you, and for the purposes of this fall's election, you have to accept it. Tell me I'm wrong on this. No. Please tell me I'm wrong.
Well, the only mistake you make is that Secretary of State doesn't accept it, the clerks and recorders do.
Right.
But with that said, you're right. We've got a problem with Colorado law. Now, on Election Day, or when a mail ballot comes in, someone can challenge that particular voter if they're there at that time when that voter shows up. You can do that challenge procedure. But you're right, as far as a registration challenge,
so in other words, if there's a poll watcher, they can say, hey, this is a new registrant, I'm going to challenge that, and they put that ballot aside?
Yeah, they can do that. Well, they'll put it aside, and then the clerk right there will resolve that. The clerk and recorder should hold sort of a mini hearing and say, well, what's your evidence, and talk to the voter, and then make a decision right there on the spot. So there's still a procedure in place, but you're right, it's not as good as it should be.
So no wonder the SEIU and others are running around like mad trying to register certain people before this election. Hey, got about a minute left here, even less. Tell me, people want to get registered. People should get registered.
Absolutely.
I want that. For those who aren't registered, what do they need to know? How difficult is this to do? I mean, it sounds as though you have to go across the Ganges in order to register. It's actually pretty easy.
Incredibly easy. Go to govotecolorado.com. Almost everyone in Colorado who's a voter has either a state ID or a driver's license. And if someone has a state ID or driver's license, govotecolorado.com. You can do it online, 5 minutes.
Scott Gessler, thank you so much. We'll keep in touch. Stay tuned. It's all about school taxes.